first team in almost 40 years. I'm sorry, almost 50 years since 1979, to be exact, to win the NBA championship from the Western Conference and not be from either the state of Texas or California. The last team to do that, the Seattle Supersonics, who of course don't even exist anymore. It's now let's just talk about a few things. First of all, there are a handful of Facebook groups built around trolling. More than a handful. One of them is built around, probably more than one of them. The one I'm in, though, is built around trolling LeBron James. Even those idiots have to now acknowledge that Jimmy Butler is nowhere near the stratosphere of LeBron James as a basketball player. He's nowhere near the stratosphere of Nikola Jokic as a basketball player. I don't even know that he's as good as Murray or Bam Adebayo. I think you can make a real case. Jokic is the best player in this series. No question. I think you can make a real case for any of the next three as the best player in the series, second best player in the series. Whether it's Butler, Murray, or Adebayo. They all do different things. They're all different type of players. But I got to tell you, and I said this when the Heat went to the finals most recently before this year in, I guess that was 2020 when they played the Lakers. Jimmy Butler has to drive himself to the point of exhaustion to play at the level of a superstar. And he can only do that so many times in such a period of time before he runs out of gas and reverts to his mean, or usually below his mean, because he's now playing at his normal level and also exhausted. So usually he's worse than his average after he's gone into playoff Jimmy, as he was called, or Superman mode, whatever you want to call it. The bottom line is, yes, with maximum effort, maximum intensity, and a few other things going his way, Jimmy Butler is able to, for times and periods, facsimile the best players in the NBA. But the thing about the best players in the NBA, the LeBrons, the Durants, the Jokic's, Giannis's, the Lucas, those guys can do that every night on 80% effort. And then when they need to, ratchet it up to the ether, the stratosphere, the otherworldly. Jimmy has to ratchet it up to 100% to be on the regular level, the day-to-day level of the guys I just mentioned. He doesn't have the ability to go into the stratosphere, but only when things go perfect. And to just live at the superstar level, he has to run his engine on full throttle, and the engine dies faster than someone who doesn't run their engine that fast. He just ran out of gas, guys. And if you've watched his career closely, as I have, with a dispassionate objectivity, as I have, this was foreseeable. It truly was. The level to which he pushed himself in the Bucks series, in the Celtics series, in the Knicks series, at the early part of this series, he ran out of gas. And I was I didn't know when it was going to happen. You never know when, but you knew it was coming. You knew it was coming, and it came. This series, he was done. He was done. He started off the series pretty good. Okay. But he was not good in this whole playoff, and neither was Miami. Miami averaged well under 100 points a game. I think they were averaging 95 or 98 a game coming into yesterday, and they scored 89. So, I think I'd have to do the math, but I think they're probably somewhere around like 92, 93 points a game when you factor in yesterday's performance. Honestly, it's I mean, it really was not a good performance. It just wasn't. And they just don't have the weapons. Jimmy Butler is not a ace star. Bam Adebayo is, I think, at least as good as Butler, but not necessarily as good at scoring. And they just ran out of gas. And ultimately, I think that if you were being real about it, this was foreseeable. And you know, you can take this one of two ways. You can credit Miami for making it this far with the talent they have, or you can say, you know what, credit to them, but they had a lot of good breaks and fortunate breaks along the way. And I'm gonna go that route. Is it glass half empty? Yeah, I guess it is. But look, they only scored 100 points or more once in this whole series. That was the game 2 win they had in Denver. They won that game by 3 points, 111 to 108. Beyond that, they had 93 in game 1, 94 in game 3, 95 in game 4, and 89 last night. That's not a good team. In the modern NBA, to be under 100 points is roughly the equivalent of being under 80 in the mid 90s. So when you add up these averages, 111, I'm going to get the exact number right now, 93, 94, 95, and 89. And you divide that by 5, 96.4. That's not good. That's not going to win. Denver, by contrast, was under 100 points only once, which was last night's game when they scored 94. They scored 108 in game 4, 109 in game 3, 108 in game 2, which they lost, and 104 in game 1. Against a very good or great defensive team, which Miami is, those are numbers you can win with. But if Miami was a better offensive team and put pressure on Denver to be more in the 110 range, they might have won this series because their defense was able to keep them in the 1-0s and just barely into 110 the one time with the 111 and just barely under it the other time with 109. A good offensive team, an average offensive team with Miami's defense probably would have won this series. But Miami's not an average offensive team. They are what their regular season record says they were. A subpar, miserable offense with a great defense, an incredible cast of role players, a great coach, and a lot of competitiveness. But all of those attributes, while impressive, important, and valid, and very laudable, they do not overcome the lack of talent that that was evident in this series. They don't have the offensive firepower. You can't manufacture that. They said it on the broadcast multiple times yesterday. Denver just had Miami's role players were being asked to do too much. They were being asked to carry the load versus supplement it. Bam Adebayo was Miami's best player in this series. He played brilliantly. He had the worst job in the whole series trying to deal with Jokic, and he had no reinforcement or backup to do it. I mean, there was no one else. What are you going to put Duncan Robinson on Joker? I mean, you can't do it. They had no other. They need a center. They need a defensive front court presence, and they need it now. If there's one glaring weakness in this series, it's that. To a much lesser extent, Denver has the same problem, as Jokic is not a shot blocker or a rim protector, but he's everything else. Miami is playing Bam Adebayo, who is probably closer to a small forward than a power forward, but is at best a stretch four. They're playing him at center with no backup to him. He doesn't have a backup center. They can't go big. It's Kevin Love. Kevin Love is their guy. So they bring him in, but he's a stretch shooter at this point. He'll get you some defensive rebounds. He'll throw some outlet passes, but he doesn't protect the paint any better than Jokic does. They desperately need some type of rim protector on this roster in a bad way. They need a banger to deal with those type of guys in a bad way. Bam had no backup in this series. None. They started playing Love more for that reason. And you could see if you were watching this series, you knew if you've been listening to the show, Rich broke this down brilliantly earlier mid last week. I forget if it was Wednesday or Thursday, something like that. When he said after Miami's game 2 win, after they won game 2, when they went to that zone and they kind of tried to take Denver out of their rhythm with that zone, it worked for a lot of that game. Denver figured it out, it seemed, near the very end, but they ran out of time on their comeback and narrowly lost by 3. Rich said, what's their adjustment to the what's Miami's adjustment to Denver's adjustment? Denver adjusted to the zone late in that game. Wasn't in time to come back and win that one. But you knew going into game 3, what's Miami going to throw at Denver now to throw them off again? How are they going to do this a few more times? And my answer then was, and we saw it bear out, they didn't win another game. They weren't really close in games 3 or 4. Yesterday's was close by score, but Denver ended up winning, of course. I said then, I don't think they have anything else. They threw the kitchen sink at Denver in game 2. They went all in game 2. It got them one more hand, but all they did was push, to use a poker term. They broke even. They tied the pot. They got out of there with, that was a win for them in that situation. And then they had nothing left. And Denver had the answers, and Denver just flat better. It was an obvious mismatch from the beginning. The NBA world would have been far better served with a real team coming out of the East versus this team that got hot at the right time. But Denver, I'll tell you what, I don't know that it would have mattered who came out of the East. If Milwaukee had played better and been healthy, if Boston had played better and been healthy, I don't know that it would have mattered. After watching Denver up close in the last couple of series, I watched the Lakers series very closely, and of course, I watched the finals very closely. It was obvious to me that I was wrong throughout the whole regular season. I thought the 3 best teams during the year were Milwaukee, Philadelphia, and Boston. Clearly, Denver was, at the very minimum, just as good as all those teams. And obviously, now we know far better. And I've been on the Denver bandwagon for a long time. They didn't sneak up on me. I'm not a bandwagon hopper. But I thought the other teams were a little bit better. I was wrong. This Denver team came together perfectly. Calvin Booth has done such a brilliant job assembling this roster. The combination of Gordon and Porter and KCP, they're just Bruce Brown, Christian Braun. All these guys just play so brilliantly together, so fluidly together. And then you have the dynamic 1-2 punch of Jokic and Murray, of course. This team is beautifully constructed. It's beautifully constructed. A little tweak here with the rim protector. A younger version of DeAndre Jordan, who, by the way, got his first NBA title last night and did actually play in the game because of foul trouble to Jokic. A younger version of him would be the only tweak I would do on this roster. But they are just a beautiful team to watch. KCP has long been my favorite NBA role guy. I was really upset when the Lakers let him go, and this is why. The guy is absolutely fantastic. He made some huge plays yesterday. And let's give blame where blame is deserved. Jimmy Butler blew this game. He was an absolute no-show. He made a couple of threes late in the game, got one favorable whistle where he appeared to kick, I think it was Aaron Gordon below the belt with a outstretched leg kick when he was shooting a three, and they called the foul on Gordon. The Nuggets challenged it and they reviewed it and still upheld the call. So he got a handful of free throws late, but realistically, with about 3 minutes to go, he was shooting 2 of 15 with 7 points. Throw in those couple of threes and the free throws, his numbers probably looked a little bit better than they were, but they still were bad. And if you watch this game, he was essentially a no-show in this one. He was horrible. And superstars, yeah, he ended up with 21 points. But again, he was a non-factor. 5 of 18. He had 2 threes late, and I think 1 layup. And he got those late free throws. That 21 points is highly deceiving. This was more of like a 13 or 15 point outing. It wasn't good. It absolutely wasn't good. And if you're a fan of basketball and you're just being honest with yourself and honest in your assessment, as Richard Anselmo joins me, Jimmy Butler last night was unacceptably terrible. You can't be that bad in a closeout finals game as the best player on your roster. Any top guy, any 1A would get these type of barbs tonight, deservedly so. It goes with the territory. Rich, he just was unacceptably awful last night.
Oh, he was terrible.
He was terrible.
He was absolutely terrible. You cannot, in a game where you could be closed out, play like that.
In the finals. Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's
It's inexcusable. And you know what? I was saying this. I think there's an argument to be made. Going into this series, Jokic was the best player and Jimmy Butler was the second best player. I'm not so sure that I can say that anymore. Jamal Murray's a beast.
Yes, he is.
He's a beast. And was there anyone happier than him last night? He was so happy after they won that game.
He grew up near here, so his story and how he grew up and he overcame and what he overcame professionally with injuries and everything. I felt very good for him.
Yeah, you have to. I mean, it was awesome to see. But where do you go from here is the question. And for me, if you're Denver, run it back. I mean, add a shot blocker, maybe a backup big of some kind, basically a younger version of DeAndre Jordan. If you could find someone of that type, I'm not suggesting you'll find someone as good as young Jordan was, but someone of that archetype, someone of that style.
Right.
If I could get like a Jacob Pirtle, if I could get, a guy like a Mitchell Robinson style.
If you could get Boucher out of Toronto, he's a shot blocker.
Yep, Chris Boucher. Yep, that's a good one. Anyone of that.
You can't run that commercial now, but Jordan not having any rings.
That's right. You ain't got no rings. Yes, I do.
Now he does.
Now he does. That's right.
It's like ex-Clipper land. So did Reggie Jackson and Bones Highland. All ex-Clippers had to leave the game.
That's right. Oh, that is great. I think ultimately Denver is positioned. I was looking at their cap numbers. They're in pretty good cap shape. Their contracts are well spread out. They got the right guys under contract. I got to tell you, I think they can run this thing back. I think they're positioned similar to the way Milwaukee was a few years ago, where I think they're going to have 3 or 4 years of basically this group of guys to take another couple of cracks at this. I think they're built to last. So this is a masterfully constructed roster.
It is. And I'll say one thing about Miami. Most of their main guys are signed till 2026.
Yep. It's just a question with their guys. Are they good enough? Do they have the talent? And I still
think Butler will. I really do. I think he can play better. I think they need to add a big,
Oh, that there's no question about that.
and they need a healthy Tyler Hero.
Yes. Yeah, he was a big missing piece. That's not the oversight. And I also think they need another go-to type of weapon. I like their supporting cast. Um, I don't love it. I think it's too heavily relied upon in this moment. Jeff Van Gundy mentioned it a few times in the broadcast yesterday, where it seemed like the supporting cast were being asked to be the lead actors, and that was because Jimmy just disappeared. And
Right.
and like I've said all along with Jimmy Butler, he has to really will himself to that 1A level. He's really more like an elite 2A versus
Yes.
an elite
Yes.
1A. He's an okay 1. He's not a great 1A. He's probably the best 2A in the NBA. You need someone of his ability or better to pair with him. Scoring ability, I'm talking about only here. Bam Adebayo, I think in a lot of ways is that team's most indispensable best player. He does so many things well, but he's not the scoring threat or anywhere close to it that Jimmy is. And they need someone of Jimmy's capabilities or even slightly better. I think if there was one team that I think could benefit from Karl Anthony Towns and get the most out of him, it's Miami. I've been hearing a lot of rumors that he's on the trading block. And if I was going to trade anybody, if I was going to trade him, if I was any team looking at him, Miami's a team that with their culture, I know Jimmy would probably love that given their history together. But but with their culture and with their organization and with what they need an offensive force. And Towns is that.
Yes, he is.
Um,
Absolutely, he is.
that would be ironic.
He would. Butler hated him
I know. That's why it would be funny.
just because he didn't come to play. I don't think you would have that choice in that.
No, well, that's the whole thing. It's a whole different infrastructure. And also Towns is also several years older at this point too.
True.
Um,
True.
well,
I
there we
saw something interesting on Facebook. It's a picture from Star Game players selected by one. And it shows Jokic sitting in a chair by himself. It says Jokic went from being bronze, picking the All-Star game to sweeping him.
that
It's funny.
is pretty funny. All right, let's take a quick break. We'll come back with the question of the day. This is the Gary Ayd Show. Back after this here on the Cave. All right. So before we get to the question of the day here, little breaking or interesting hockey business news. The Ottawa Senators sold for a record-setting valuation, and they're one of the smaller markets in the NHL. Although they are Canada, which accounts for something. But they sold at almost $1 billion. 900 million sold to Fenway Sports Group, paid for that was the Pittsburgh Pirates. I'm sorry. This one was worth a little bit more than that. Almost $1 billion.
Yeah, it was worth just about $1 billion.
Yeah. Yep. And that's Montreal Canadiens co-owner Michael Andelauer. And that's a new NHL high watermark. So that's fairly significant. And yeah, that's pretty interesting.
It is, and it's a good ownership group too.
Hopefully they have a little more winning success than the Canadians.
Well, right now, just about everybody does.
Well, that's my point. All right. Well, there we have it. Let's go ahead and get to our question of the day. I thought that was interesting. Let's go ahead and play this question and see what we got today.
The future of sports memorabilia is detached. I am KO, back in a minute with your sports question of the day.
Greece is cheap.
But the airfare costs a fortune.
Paris?
Not much closer, and again, airfare...
What about Puerto Vallarta?
Let's face it, flying anywhere is just too expensive.
Wait, what's this? Low-cost airlines.
With one call to low-cost airlines, you'll drastically slash your travel costs. We're talking insanely low airline prices to any of your favorite destinations. Where would you like to go? London, Rome, Costa Rica, Australia?
Wow, that's cheap.
So why wait? Call now to learn how crazy cheap it is to fly anywhere in the U.S. or international. Our prices are so low, we can't publish them. The only way to get them is to call to instantly hear the most amazing best deals on airline travel. It's that easy. So call now and start packing.
800-648-9175. 800-648-9175. 800-648-9175. That's 800-648-9175.
In-person autograph signings are a thing of the past. At least that's the plan, according to digital autograph service DigiSign. DigiSign uses proprietary software to create real-time interactions between fans and athletes via livestream technology. A DigiSign autograph session can be done through a smartphone or tablet in just 45 seconds. In that time, the player and fan can converse while the fan watches the athlete complete their signature digitally. Question for autograph chasers. Which would you rather have? A photograph signed digitally or a napkin signed in person?
You know what?
Oh,
Go ahead.
I'll take the napkin every time.
You know,
Because in order to get it, I have to interact with that person anyway. And I'm not an autograph chaser.
No, I'm not either. Although I will say that the reason I'm going to go the other way with this, and it's only one thing and one thing only. The napkin was signed in real life, but it's still just a napkin. I like the idea of having a photo better than having a napkin, and it was signed, and I was there to watch it. Yes, it's digital, and I would like option C, the signed photo from real life. But if the
Thank you. Yes.
if the two choices are a signed napkin in person or a digitally signed photo that I know is real because I was on the call and talked to him, where it's basically a Skype call with e-signature capabilities. That's essentially what this technology is. I'd still rather see the photo signed in real life, but if my choices are the napkin in real life or the photo signed virtually, I'll take the photo. But I'm not going to go. That choice wouldn't occur to me, because part of the attraction, if you are going to do these autograph shows, is the camaraderie you have with everyone you go with. That's like 90% of the fun is if you're in the line with all these people. Yeah, you're in line, but you're in line with other knuckleheads like yourself that loved
Yeah,
watching these guys play, and you're sitting there talking and telling stories and tall tales, and it becomes a fun day. Like the autograph itself is almost like anticlimactic at some point after a while. It's really the environment. What am I going to do? Talk to myself? I do that for a living. My goodness. Well, sometimes I do it for a living. Rich is here right now, so we're talking to each other. But
that's
like,
right.
we don't really like. I don't need to like. The whole fun of getting an autograph is going to see all the other fans that are chasing the same thing. So
I I was at the I think it was 1991 NHL draft.
okay.
The first pick was Eric Lindros,
Yep.
now in the Hockey Hall of Fame.
Yes.
I had, I think, a draft magazine or some sort of book, and Lindros obviously is the first round pick. The first pick usually was on the cover.
Mm-hmm.
He was walking through the stands to see someone, and I asked him to sign it and talk to him for a minute. Put away in a real nice, secure place. Years later, I'm like, wow, I wish I could have this authenticated. I'm at a store, and a guy was talking to someone that he had authenticated things. I said, "Could you authenticate an autograph that was 30 years ago?"
No.
He said, "I'd have to see it." He said, "Who is it?" I said, "Eric Lindros." He goes, "Oh, pretty popular autograph. I could tell just by looking at it." And for $10, he authenticated it. I got a certificate and everything.
That's awesome. But you knew it was authentic because you physically watched him do it, right?
I was there, yes.
Right.
And I actually talked to him for a minute. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's a cool story. When I was a kid, it probably was around that same time period. Maybe it was a few years later. Maybe it was like 94 or 95, but it was around that same time period. My dad took me to an autograph signing somewhere in Connecticut. I was too young to really realize where we were going. But I seem to think for some reason it was Danbury, Connecticut, which would make sense. That's about an hour from where we grew up in Goshen. And it was at a mall, so I think it was the Danbury Fair Mall, and it was mostly pro wrestlers. There were a couple of basketball players there, but the basketball players were kind of like leaving as we got there. I walked past, or they walked past me. What I later learned was Rick Fox, and but he was like leaving as I was getting there. I only learned this because a friend of mine, uh, who was a little bit older, also went to this thing. A friend of my parents, really not mine, and told me about it years later when I asked some details about it that I wasn't old enough to understand or appreciate. Well, what I do remember, what I did understand and appreciate was how terrifying these guys were to a 8-year-old. I mean, I was, whatever you are when you're 8, probably 60 pounds and like 4 foot something, whatever, right? Let me tell you, meeting Sid Vicious at that age and size was absolutely terrible. I could have sworn he was just going to eat me. Like, I had a picture of him for a long time, and he doesn't even look happy in the picture. He looked, because back then he was known as Psycho Sid, and he looked every bit the part. And I was convinced, because wrestling was my sport at the time. And of course, I'm at the age where I still think it's kind of basically real. And I was convinced he was going to like power bomb me or kill me. It's just absolutely terrifying, but like a great memory at the same time.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah. Like I said, it was around that same time. I might have been at the oldest 10 at the time, but I think I was more like 8 or 9. So it was in the early to mid 90s. So
I've met a lot of athletes and have never asked for an autograph. just never happened.
Right. No, it's not my thing either. But there you
And
go.
I cherish more the conversations I had with a lot of people
Yes,
than I do the name on a piece of paper.
absolutely.
And a name that's digitally done on a piece of paper means if it was digitally done, but they took our picture together, I might be a little more accepting.
Absolutely. I mean, it's yeah. I there's certain things that I really don't mind. There's a lot of things I don't mind doing digitally, but a lot of stuff is really more about the experience of physically being there than the efficiency of the experience. There's nothing efficient about an autograph show. You're basically in a cattle line. It's true.
Right.
But you're talking to the people in that cattle line, and you're all there in that same line for the same reason, basically. So
Yes.
the chances that you're going to have something in common to talk to the people around you about are virtually 100% in that type of setting,
Oh,
you know? So it's not like you're standing in line waiting to, get checked in at Social Security or the DMV. Yeah. Anything to do with those situations. Yeah. Let me do it online if I can, please. Like no one wants to be here, including the people that are paid to be here. What are we talking about? No
yeah,
one wants to be
that's no pleasure trip.
there. No,
Not at all.
no. But going to an autograph signing, I know I've seen people make the argument that virtual reality, like thrill rides, have taken the place of going to the amusement park for them because you don't have to get online, you don't have to drive, you don't have to park. And I get where they're coming from with all that, but a whole part of the fun to me is talking to the people in the line with me about, where they're from, what how often they go, what rides they've been on, what's your favorite, that kind of thing. Like all that's lost in digital interface. Um and that's
True.
there's something to that, I think. So,
I agree. I agree completely. You know, I would rather have the napkin, but what I would most like is a picture with the person. If
yes.
that can be signed, great. If not, then digitally is fine.
Right. Right. Yep, that's what I think too. All right, cool. Well, let's take a break. We'll come back. We got more to get to. I want to talk a little bit more about the season that was and kind of put into context what this Nugget team might mean for we know it's a copycat league. What's going to be the new trend? I think there's some things we can prognosticate and forecast here about what the league's going to do in response to Denver winning its first NBA title. That's next. Back after this, the Gary Ayd Show here on The Cave. All righty, we are back here on the Gary Ayd Show. Now, one thing I think maybe more so than who's going to win the next year, I think the most reliable thing you can usually, to some degree, kind of forecast and predict in the wake of any sports championship is sort of what the flavor of the month for the next couple of years is going to be in terms of the type of players and type of roster competing teams try to build to topple the team that just won. Particularly when the team that just won did it in a way where it hasn't been done either ever or at least in a while. And Denver did not reinvent the wheel, but it reset the wheel. For a lot of years now, it's been the copycat has tried to be like the 3-point shooting, the 3 all-stars, and certainly those methods, particularly the 3 all-stars, have worked at various times, multiple times throughout NBA history. But people falsely categorized the Warriors all these years as essentially a 3-point shooting team versus a team that was built on the defensive end and ball movement that happened to have 2 or so great 3-point shooters. And the difference is stark, and that's why we got a lot of bad copycats. Atlanta comes to mind as a bad copycat version of that. Portland is another example. Bad copycat versions that never had any chance of winning a title because they were poorly conceived. This Denver team is wholly different in its construct, completely different in its approach. This team is more of an 80s type of roster, Rich, with 2 dominant players that complement each other perfectly. They're complete inverses of one another. One's a guard, one's a center. But both are great shooters and passers, of course. And then they have a roster full of interchangeable, multi-purpose, athletic players that complement. This reminds me of an 80s roster or an early 2000s roster, similar to like the Kobe and Shaq Lakers or even the Magic Johnson Lakers, not in the absolute veracity of the talent, but in the style and volume of the talent on the roster. I think this roster is going to reset how teams build their teams going forward. I think the market for trading massive assets to acquire another star is going to go out of favor for a little while. And I think you're going to see teams try to have 4 to 6 really good players along with the 2 right guys versus 3 great guys and then a bunch of scraps. I think you're going to start seeing that again. I really do.
I hope so. I really do. I think it's important to get back to that because it's more fun and more interesting to watch. The thing about copycats are Atlanta was trying to copy the Warriors.
Oops.
And Trae Young to know Steph Curry.
No, not quite.
That's not close.
Not close. That's like me trying to copy the kid that could color inside the lines. It was still the same coloring book. It was the same outline drawing. All I had to do was color it in. Yeah, mine never looked the same.
Of course, that's just how it is. Sometimes.
It's like, oh, Gary did this one. How'd you know it's the same one?
and if you want to do that and copy this Denver team, you better find a Jokic, and I'm sure they're not going on skis either.
No, that's very true. Yeah, you're gonna have to. I mean, the blueprint is 2 star players of opposite positions. It's the Shaq Kobe blueprint, right? It's the Murray Jokic. We've seen this approach before. We had the going back further in time. You had the Frazier and Reed blueprint. The Wilt and West. I mean, it's the center guard combo that just logically does make a lot of sense. Now Jokic's skill set is a particular fit for the modern game that you would need to have at least some of. You don't necessarily need the immaculate passing that he brings to the table, which is sort of his unique proposition. But you do need the shooting, if your best or second best player is going to be a center right now, you need him to be able to shoot. Like that's at this point non-negotiable. If he's going to be one of your best two guys, he has to be able to do that. But most centers that come along the pike from now on probably will be able to shoot for exactly that reason. They're going to have to be able to, unless they're a role player. You know, if you're telling me it's a guard and a power forward, like let's say you have let's say a combination of like a Damian Lillard and a Giannis, then okay, maybe you don't need your center. Your center could be Jacob Purtle, who's an okay shooter, by the way, but you could have a non-shooting center. But if he's gonna be one of your best guys, you don't have that option.
True. Very true. Yeah, and like you said, it does depend on the position. And we have to remember how important that is. But I understand where you're coming from as far as building the team out.
Right.
The way you're talking about doing it is the best way to do it.
That's what's going to be, I think, more in vogue the next couple of years. I think you're going to see more teams with more quality guys, you know, veteran, not old veterans, in the middle of their rotation. I'm talking about guys 4 through 7 or 5 through 8. That crop of players. Because
not having 3 max contracts means you won't have to sign a bunch of guys to mid-level.
Exactly.
Veteran minimum deals.
That's right. This team does not win without the contributions of Pope, Brown, and Gordon. It doesn't happen.
Right.
I mean,
Gordon, the entire series.
Oh, he was so good. He destroyed Miami, just physically brutalized them. They had no one to guard him. I mean, half the time I saw Kyle Lowry on him at times. Like
it started in game 1. And Gordon even said after the game, it helps that you're playing with Jokic because he has a way of finding.
Yes.
One interesting fact from the game, I don't know how much this means. There are some stats that are useful, some that aren't.
Yes.
Jimmy Butler was a -20 and 0-2 when Shakira sits courtside. And I'm sure there's people with the Heat saying she's got to be banned from games right now. No more.
Oh, that is hilarious.
She can't even be here.
That's so funny. That is so funny. It's like the new version of the Kardashian curse, I guess, right?
See?
Look at that. That's funny. This won't be breaking news to you, but it might be to some of our audience. This was the first Western Conference championship in the NBA won by a non-California or Texas team since 1979. How crazy that is.
And that team's not even around.
They don't even exist anymore. That's right. How far back would you have to go? Of course, it's the Sonics. How far back would you have to go to, if like, let's just say, okay, for a team that still exists in the West? Because I guess Portland in 77, right? With Walton. Yeah. So just a couple of years later, right? Just a couple of years earlier. Right. So that's so crazy. It really is nuts. That's something. I mean,
it's a good week for Serbs too. I mean, we had Djokovic the day before, winning number 23.
Oh yeah,
and Jokic the day after.
Yeah, Novak Djokovic is one of the most physically impressive athletes, regardless of sport, that I've ever seen. That guy's an absolute machine.
Isn't he though?
I mean, he's just a machine. I used to be amazed. There's every so often you see this in individual sports. It's harder in team sports. But in individual sports like golf and tennis, you see every once in a while you'll see a guy that you're genuinely surprised when they lose. Like I'm for a number of years, I was always like shocked. Like, wait, Djokovic lost. They got the score wrong. That's not possible. Like
I know.
it's just like, wait, someone beat him? How? Did he break a leg? What would he play on one arm? What's going on here? Like he was just at that level where it's like, how are you gonna beat this guy? Like you can't. Like look at him. You can't beat that guy, right? Like I mean, there's been a handful of those guys over the years. At one point, Tiger Woods was like that, which was insane when you think about golf. I mean, the odds of winning a golf tournament are basically like 2% for the best players, right? They're maybe like 6% or so. They're single digits. I'd have to look up the numbers, but they're single digits. Now,
Mhm.
now consider that at Tiger's peak in the early 2000s or so, there were often spreads in casinos of Tiger versus the field. And like it was close enough that they were spreading both. How ridiculous is that? Like if you're not 30 or so, you don't really remember Tiger Woods at his apex. But I'm here to tell you, at his apex, you took Tiger against the field sometimes in majors.
Yes.
And you won.
Yes.
It was crazy.
If Phil Mickelson said, why should I come up at that same time?
Right? Yeah. Darn, my timing stinks.
Talk about bad timing.
Yeah, it's true.
Back to the Nuggets. One interesting point. Someone asked Bruce Brown about being a free agent. He said, "Money's not everything. I want to stay here."
Bruce Brown said that?
Yeah.
Good. He belongs there. He fits there, man. What an acquisition he was. He was something. I mean, he made some big plays in this game. And how about Kentavious Caldwell-Pope? This is my favorite role player in the NBA. This guy is such a good player. He's a shooter. He's a defensive guy. He drives to the basket at times when he has the opportunity. He plays in transition. He's got a keen nose for the ball. He made the game sealing steal in this one, basically against Butler. He's not afraid of the moment. That's the biggest thing. Not only is he not afraid, it's one thing to be a role player. Take like a Rick Fox or a Robert Ory or a Danny Green as three examples. They're not afraid to take the shot when it comes to them in the big game down the stretch. Right. Pope takes it to another level. He's not afraid to attack the play at the end of a game. He goes after it. He doesn't let the game come to him. Role players generally will let even great role players, like the guys I just mentioned, they'll let the moment come to them. This guy goes and takes it, man. He's got confidence for days. The way the guy plays the game, I just love watching him.
I think a lot of that's coaching too. One gives these guys the confidence. I mean, a lot of the players were talking about that. They didn't have the green light that they have here.
Right. That's certainly true for Bruce Brown. That's a good example of that.
Yeah, and even Gordon was like, in Orlando, well, don't take that shot.
Right. Pope's the
Far
exception.
away from the basket.
Right.
Yeah.
Pope's the exception because he made plays like this with the Lakers when they won the title 3 years ago, which is why I was so upset when they didn't keep him.
But then again, they paid the price for having 3 stars.
That's
and I agree with you. That doesn't have to be that way anymore.
Right. It can work, and it does work at times. I mean, it certainly worked for the Lakers. It's worked, for other teams in the past. It certainly worked for the Spurs to an extent. They never had notable role players of significant import other than like in the middle years of Duncan's year. But once like the Bowens and the Malik Roses were retired, Danny Green was like their one notable role guy. They had a lot of kind of also ran spare parts that worked, but
and Green was about near the end at that point too.
Right.
He didn't have a lot left.
No, he didn't have a lot left. So you need the right 3, and you better get it right. See, Brooklyn went the shotgun approach, and it just wasn't going to work.
Right.
Miami did it properly. They put the right 3 together. A lot of it had to do with, well, it's hard to mess up when the first one of the three is LeBron James. The rest will work just because the first one will make sure it does. But there's
First
only
one's
one of those guys.
unselfish enough to.
Right.
Yeah.
But to your point,
Which is why this works with Jokic.
that's what I was just going to say. From what you said a few minutes ago, that's exactly right. The number one is so good and so unselfish that it will work.
I'm going to give my props to Miami too,
Mhm.
just for getting that far. And this is props to Spoelstra as well. Every team they played had a better all-around roster.
Yep.
Every team,
Every
the
single
Bucks,
one, with maybe the
Knicks,
exception of the
the
Knicks.
Celtics. I don't know.
I think the Knicks and Heat were pretty much a push. If I was going to say that one, but yeah, I get your point. Continue. I that was just the one exception there to me. I think they're about equal, those two.
Okay,
But yeah,
but every other team,
without question, without question,
they played above their pay grade.
Yes.
and it showed.
Definitely 100%, which is why I kept picking against them, because they were so obviously mismatched on talent, and all the laudable qualities that they bring to the table that you mentioned are all wonderful, and they certainly worked. But I always was, I'm always going to pick the talent when it's a noticeable disparity in an NBA playoff series, because usually talent, wins out. But
Right.
Kudos to the Heat, and that's why it's noteworthy, and that's why it's newsworthy, is because it didn't for two, and depending how you look at the Knicks, maybe 3 series, and that's why
And
it's notable.
it's no shame losing where they did.
No, they lost to a better team,
A much better
team, far better team. Right, they lost to a better team. They had no answer. I was talking right before you joined me at the beginning of the show. I was talking about something you mentioned early last week after Game 2, when Denver went to that. Oh, I'm sorry, when Miami went to that zone and clearly threw Denver for a while. They were able to win that game by the skin of their teeth because the Nuggets figured the zone out with just too little time left to mount the full comeback. They just ran out of time. And you said something to the effect of, what's Miami's next adjustment? And I said something to the effect of, I don't think they have one. And that's how the rest of the series played out. Once Denver figured out that zone, Miami didn't have another chess move. They were
No,
out.
they didn't. And I think I told you they were playing checkers while the Nuggets were playing chess.
Yeah, they tried all their tricks already, and the Nuggets, they just had all the answers. They were just better. It's just as simple as that. Better players, better team, and that's just all there was to it. Matchups were not in Miami's favor. Aaron Gordon was a complete mismatch, and he's like the 4th best player on that roster, and he was a total headache. When the 4th best guy on the other team gives you matchup problems, you're in a lot of trouble.
Well, half the time he ended up with Strus or someone on.
Right, a guy who's like 6'6" and 200 pounds versus Gordon, who's like 6'9" and 240.
Right.
That's a total mismatch.
And athletic.
Right. Yeah, well, athletic's the understatement. He's one of the most athletic players of the last 15 years in the NBA.
Mm-hmm.
What?
I know we're running a little past.
Yeah.
I just want to mention a couple of things real quick. The Rangers hired Peter Laviolette as their new head coach. Expectations are going to be high, and pressure is going to be on a good hire. He's a person who can handle it.
Yep, no question.
The Stanley Cup can be awarded tonight. Game 5 is in Vegas. I think there's a good chance they put Florida away, but I've been wrong before. And the Yankees play the Mets tonight.
Yeah, with both Alonso and Judge out. Talking about missing the juice.
Let's see who steps up.
Let's go Mets. One thing I'll add, the NBA draft is coming around the bend here in a couple of days. A couple of weeks, I mean. The 23rd, I think it is. So we'll be doing some coverage, I think, daily. We're going to go through, like we've done in the past with these type of things. We're going to take one team per conference, I think, starting Monday, and go through their needs based on where they're projecting to pick. And I think that'll be a fun exercise. We'll pay particular and extensive attention, of course, to the local teams. But the NBA draft is going to be very interesting this year because after the top two, it's very, very open to interpretation.
Yes.
So should be a
I'm
lot of fun.
usually pretty confident in the top 10 this year. I don't feel that. Oh,
It's hard to. But one thing that I think is going to be of particular importance is the play of the ultimate long-term level of play attained by Scoot Henderson, because with the pedigree he has the added, I think, responsibility of becoming potentially a major top of the league type of star as a natural born American, which right now the best players in the league are principally foreign born. Certainly 3 of the top 4 are with Embiid, Giannis, Jokic, and Luka, so 4 of the top 5. Whoever you want to put in that 5th slot. I mean, you can make some case for Durant, you can make a case for LeBron, you can make a case for a few other guys, I'm sure. But I think it would be very beneficial from a purely marketing perspective if Scoot Henderson became a true NBA superstar. So that's going to be something to keep an eye on, but we'll get more into that as we get closer. So that does it for today. Little programming note. From now until the start of football season, most likely we're going to be a 1-hour program. This is to ensure only the very best stuff reaches the airwaves here. We will have more information on the exact specifics of that tomorrow. We'll be back tomorrow for 4:00, and we will reveal going forward sort of how this is going to be structured. But the time change there will be no time changing here. It will be the same time slot, and we'll give you the specifics of what that looks like tomorrow. But we're going to head out for now. We will see you tomorrow. This is the Gary Ayd Show here on The Cave.